And we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat. And today our guest is Kimberly Hennessy. And we're here to talk about her dystopian sci fi book, She Runs with Wolves. Okay, yeah, I got it right.
Yes. Thank you
And
so much for having me.
yeah, thank you for being here. And why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, as you said, my name is Kimberly Hennessy, and I recently published my very first novel, She Runs with Wolves. And as you said, it is a sci-fi fantasy dystopian novel set into an apocalyptic future. And yeah, and that's basically it. Aside from writing my heart out, I'm a full-time mom, I'm a copywriter, and a screenwriter. That's what I do when I'm not writing my own books.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about the book. What's it about?
So, gosh, I think that's like the toughest question to answer because my book, it just feels like there's just so many layers that I never know exactly which direction to go in, but I'll give it my best shot. So basically the protagonist, which her name is Ira, is a captive of the evil King Lorcan, and she's been his captive since as far back she can remember. And he mistreats her, of course, and now she discovers that she's pregnant, and she doesn't want to inflict that kind of pain and torture to her child. So now she decides this is time for me, to escape. But what's happening at the same time, and she doesn't understand why, is that her mind is also like unraveling. So throughout the entire book, she's like truly, how do I put it, an unreliable character. We never really know if it's what's happening to her, if it's true, if it's not true, what she's going through. So it's really a descent into madness. And it was kind of important to me to actually try and capture that. I couldn't tell you why that was important to me, but throughout the book, we have a very deep POV of her unraveling. So she does manage to escape. And once she thinks she's found freedom, she actually falls into this underground cult bent on reviving the old ways. And she kind of soon discovers, at first, she thinks it's like, oh, okay, they found me. So I guess I'm saved. But then she discovers that she's kind of part of their salvation. And so she finds that really weird. She's like, how is this possible? And then she discovers like the truth, like, no, she's an integral part of their salvation. But to save those people, to save them, she will need to give up a part of who she is, of her essence. And she doesn't quite know what that means yet, but it's kind of all linked to saving her baby, making sure that, she doesn't die, the baby doesn't die. And it's all involved with like a ritual. And then at some point, she's going to go through the ritual and she'll discover that she's going to lose. I don't want to give out too much of what it's all about, but she's going to lose part of herself. And to recover that part of herself that's been lost, we'll introduce 3 wolves. And these wolves will bring her back to who she needs to be able to, save her daughter, save her people, and defeat the evil King Lorcan. So I don't know if that makes any sense. And in all of that, without selling too much of the book, there's artificial intelligence. Like I said, there are wolves, and it's very tribal. I was very much attracted to Mad Max. So when you're in the future with all the old relics that are actually, futuristic in a sense. And so you find a lot of that in the book, where you find old artifacts that are actually technologically advanced, and they're trying to figure out what those things are because the world is ruined, So I don't know if, some of your viewers they've watched Mad Max, but if they remember that specific part where there's like a bunch of kids and they all see Mad Max and they're like, oh, you're the captain. And then they introduce him to the airplane. And that scene, that was so poignant to me because, we're in the future, but they don't know what that plane is. So there's a lot of that going on in my book as well. So I don't know if that was clear, if I did justice to the story, but yeah, that's kind of it.
Well, one of our viewers thinks it sounds complex and intriguing. So
Oh, thank you.
anyway, so it also sounds like you have some almost occult horror elements in it. Would that be accurate?
Cult horror. Well, maybe cultish, yeah. Horror, I don't know, because I tend to. So there is like, if you mean horror, like in the sense of the proper term, like a horror movie, a horror, like those kinds. There's
No, I'm
not
thinking
that
more
much.
along the lines of psychological horror.
Yeah, maybe more psychological, where yeah. So the unraveling, trying to understand, you know. Yeah, I guess you could say, yeah, cult horror would definitely yeah, apply here, because there is that element where the underground people that are trying to revive their religion, they have to go about it with these mysterious rituals that can be sometimes, very painful and yeah, and violent. So yeah, I guess that would apply.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the main character, what she like. When you mentioned she was an unreliable narrator, so, but what's her personality like?
So the poor so that's the other thing. This is, I've mentioned this before. It was important for me to have a protagonist that is of a certain age. So although my book is YA, new adult, in its feel and the way that she's trying to know herself to get to that next point in her own evolution, you could say, like, discovering who she is and becoming a reliable character, I guess, so to speak. It was important for me to outline that, like, every time I looked, like I watched Pride and Prejudice, for example, or those kinds of movies, the protagonist is always like 15 and I'm like, man, I'm like, well, now I'm 45, but there was, when all this started, I was like a new mom, and I was like, I'm like 30, and I still haven't got it figured it out. So I haven't figured it out. So I was like, it's important for me to, if I was going to write a book, this was way before I started writing this book, that the protagonist be of a certain age to, I guess, show, or just to make me feel, because I wanted to read a character that looked and felt like what I was going through, So it was important for me for Ira to be, when I did start writing this book, that she'd be of a certain age. So she's mostly around 30 years old. And she's just had a super difficult life. She was captured at, a very young age, but she doesn't remember. Like, what she remembers is always being at the service of this evil King Lorcan. And he's just cruel with her. And every month, on like the full moon, he does these weird rituals with her, and she doesn't understand why. They're painful, and she's like, she just never understood. But she's like this woman, but still with a childlike mind, because she was never taught or shown how to grow up, how to become a woman. And so that's it. So she's very vulnerable, and this was important to me, that when I write this character throughout the entire novel, that her vulnerability was her strength. And so yeah, so she's mentally she's mentally broken. She doesn't rely on anyone. She doesn't trust anyone, because of obviously being, captive for the past, 20, 30 years. So that's it. And basically throughout the entire novel, she's searching for herself and discovering and trying to find that courage that she needs to be able to save the next generation, which is her baby. So that's it. She's a vulnerable character who has to go through, a mental hardship, go down into the madness to find herself at the other end of the tunnel.
Interesting. So Christy likes the fact that she's an older protagonist too.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that was so important to me, absolutely. Because although I love YA novels, I love everything about them, and new adult, I always saw myself in those main characters, but I always felt like man, I don't have it figured. I never. Well, first of all, I hadn't figured it out at 15, and again at 25, where I thought once I had reached 25, oh, I'll have it figured out by then. Still hadn't figured it out, and then by 30, still, so many questions, and by 45, I can't say I have it figured it out. I can't say I have figured it out, but what I can say is that I'm more comfortable with with not knowing and not being super fully secure in the decisions, because I don't know, for some reason, you always see the older generation like, oh man, they seem like they have it all, they all know it and they all know what they're doing, but
No.
no. And you get to that age and you're like, man, I feel like, a child in a woman's body, because I'm like, I don't know what the heck I'm
Yeah,
doing here.
I'm 54. No, I
Not
haven't got it figured out.
Okay, well, I'm glad that I'm not alone, and I'm glad that it's true for other people as well, in the sense that we need to talk about this, because for us women especially, we're always going through life where, we need, especially when we have kids. In my case, I have kids, and there are days where I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing here, and I'm just winging it, and that's okay. And we tend to beat ourselves down, but if we talk about it and we see that, okay, we're not alone, then it's maybe easier to bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Justin likes your character description. So.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm not doing too poorly, I guess.
Okay. So what was the hardest scene for you to write in the book, or the type of scene?
There were many. There were many hard scenes. So basically, I'm a very visual person. Like I said before, I write screenplays. So when I started thinking up this book, it was in terms of visual scenes. So I knew very specific scenes that I wanted to write. I just didn't know how to connect them all together, and I didn't know. So I'm not the kind of person, like, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I had this idea for a book, and I wrote it all in one sitting, and at the end I had a book. I'm not that person. I dubbed myself the slow writer. I'm very slow, and the ideas trickle in, and then I'm like, oh, that's good. Then I try it out, and I'm like, oh no, that doesn't work. Delete, go back to the drawing board. So it's a slow process, and that's it. So basically, the hardest scenes were the ones that I had to connect between the scenes. So it could have been, some dialogue that I needed to make up, just to get, from one battle scene, let's say, to another, where it's just like filling in the gaps kind of thing. And those were difficult for me to write, because they just felt lifeless and boring. So I had to really, snazz it up, or figure out, or just, accept the fact that these are, like in the movie industry, we call it B-roll, where it's like just filling up just to get to those scenes, right? So, and to accept the fact that at some point you'll have to have a couple of pages where it links to, it can't always be action. Well, that was the bottom line. So that's it. It can't always be action. So those were difficult scenes for me to write. And I think the most difficult scene for me to get through, I guess, was there's a scene with so Ira, at some point, she's face to face with one of her enemies towards the end of the book, and yeah, it was tough, because they're in this like kind of underground ruinous hotel that's been covered up over the centuries, and it's very apocalyptic, and I was just trying to put myself into that situation, and she's surrounded by her three wolves, and then there's this one person whom she's supposed to love, but there's just no more connection there. And yeah, that was tough for me to write. I couldn't tell you why, but I remember struggling to get through those scenes towards the end. Maybe because I don't know why they were difficult for me to write, but yeah, I guess that would be it.
Okay, so what was your favorite scene that you wrote in the book?
Those are many. I guess, well, one that pops up to mind, but I have many. So yeah, I have a few of those. But I guess I'll talk about they often revolve around the wolves because wolves are the best, and I just love wolves. And I guess I was inspired definitely by Game of Thrones. I think Game of Thrones was definitely an inspiration when I wrote this book, but I've always been fascinated by wolves. They're like my spirit animal, that and the moose. And there is a moose, so the book as well. But I think the one that I really, really, really loved writing was, so Ira at some point discovers that these wolves are a part of her, and she's part of a pack of these wolves, and she's on the hunt, and she had to leave her baby behind because if she didn't, they would have killed the child, and she had to like escape. Anyways, I won't go into too much detail, but so once she gets out of the underground cult and she makes it back to the surface, she goes on the hunt with her three wolves. There's Winston, Alasdair, and Darren. And they all go on the hunt, and she's part of the pack. And that was the most thrilling scene for me to write. I don't know why. I think I felt like a wolf while I was writing it. And it was just like they're mining, they're smelling, and they can smell the fear of the moose and the baby moose that they're hunting. And there's a parallel. So there's the mama moose and the baby moose. And there's a parallel between Ira, who has to kill the mother moose. And then there's a connection that happens between the two moms. So the mother moose and her as a mom that left her child behind. And there's that connection. There's like this, I don't want to say too much, but there's a connection that happens between the two moms, the two animalistic, and there's a surrender that happens in that moment that, I don't know, it was just very moving for me to write that. I think maybe because as a mom, it was definitely, I connected with that very much. And that for me was one of the most thrilling scenes to write. That and the ending was definitely when Ira really comes into her own and she just destroys an entire, camp towards the ending, and she just goes for blood. So that was fun too. I like writing fight scenes. They're very exciting.
Okay, so tell us about some of your secondary characters. Are any of them a little quirky or like to steal scenes?
So there's definitely a secondary character that it's like part of the book is about him as well. So not that there's an actual love interest in the book, because it's like they're on two separate journeys, but there's this so when we start the novel, Ira's by herself, but she's hoping to rely on Doer, her kind of ally, to be able to escape the king. So she's hoping to have Doer as her ally, but he kind of abandons her in the moment that she needs him the most. And in doing that, once he abandoned her, she lost all trust in everyone, because she had kind of given in that moment with him. And when he dropped her like a cold fish, she was like, that's it, I'm never trusting anyone ever again. And that's how the whole thing starts. So, but we also follow Doer in his own story, and basically so a lot of people think that I identify with Ira mostly, the main character, because we all have a little bit of ourselves in our characters. Well, anyways, in my case, I have a bit of myself in every character, but the one that I identify the most with is Doer, who is, and it's sad because I'm like, I'm kind of a confident person. I am someone that tries to be outgoing and all that. And Doer is really this recluse, shut down. He's had a very difficult past. He's a prisoner now, and he's just decided to shut down and wait for death, basically. And it's weird that I say it. I identify with him the most. I am not suicidal or anything like that. Far from it. I love life and everything. It's just that I think he's very afraid to reach out and show any kind of vulnerability, and he's afraid to be. He's kind of broken. Not that I'm broken, but yeah, life can sometimes be hard, and with that hardship, you kind of build, a bit of a. I have the word in French, a bit of a shell to protect yourself. And I feel like, that's something I can identify with. I've tried over the years to protect myself from different things. I'm so sorry. My son is knocking at the door. I told him not to. Can you hold on?
Yeah, we can wait.
Okay, so sorry about that.
Okay, so our guest is taking a short break to deal with family matters. Welcome to the wondrous unpredictability of live internet broadcasting. So
I'm so sorry about that.
no, that's okay.
Okay, so I kicked him out. I was like, "Go play." So yeah, that's it. Doer has that really protective shell, and he just doesn't want to let anybody in because he's afraid of getting hurt again. And I feel like maybe I have done that also in the past, and I can really identify with him on that level. And people are surprised by that because they're like, "Oh, really? I thought you would have identified with first the female, protagonist era, the main character." And I'm like, I kind of do, because I kind of strive to become more like her, where she's vulnerable. And yes, it's really difficult because she's, she's getting hurt right, left, and center. But that's what makes her super strong. And she's, building herself out of that vulnerability. So that's it. And she's learning to, to discover who she is. So Doer is another main character that we follow alongside Ira. And I think the whole point of me doing it that way, it's not really a love interest, because, there's no love scenes or anything like that throughout the book. But I think the point was to show, like, we do need each other, men and women, whether it's as a couple or just to exist in this space, we need each other to rise each other up. And I think that was the whole premise behind doing it the way I did it in the book, was like, we're constantly hearing about like the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter, and we need to be allies in those struggles. And I think that was the whole point behind me doing it that way. Other quirky characters, there's not a lot of quirk, I'd have to say, in this book. But I think the wolves do take up a lot of space, and they kind of represent, courage and leadership and playfulness. There's one, Darren is one of the more playful characters, playful wolves. And so aside from that, and then I do have, the underground cult. So there's priestesses in the underground cult. There's Rena and Fola. And so they're all pretty dark. They're all pretty heavy duty. There is some humor, but it's not, I can't say that it is a humoristic novel. Nobody's quirky. Everybody's pretty serious and gloomy. But and I think I'd like to add, because this comes up a lot, the names of my characters, when now I'm pronouncing them properly, in like on live feed, so people, if they read it, they'll know, okay, so that's, you pronounce it Darren. But all the names are taken from mythological Irish, Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic, so the spelling is really out there. So if anybody knows of Irish spelling, it's impossible.
I do.
Right. Okay. So it's impossible. Like, people will be reading it and we gotta go forward law. How did you pronounce that? And for some people, it kind of throws them out of the book. And the reason why I want to bring it up is because it was really important for me to talk about, to integrate my roots are Gaelic, so the Celtic, Gaelic, Irish roots, Scottish. And when I started writing this book, it was really important for me to, I'm also Canadian, to have those roots. Yeah, it was important for me to have that mythological Arthurian feel. I wanted to have, and to have a woman at the helm of that Arthurian kind of legend, so to speak. And to add to that, I wanted it to have that Irish Gaelic nature, Scottish Gaelic. And so the only way that I could do that was through the names to give it that flair. And so that's why I did it, because I wanted a little bit of me in the book. So a bit of like an Easter egg, in the sense that if you do go fishing, and researching the names, you'll see like, oh, that's what it means, if you want to. You don't have to, but if someone wanted to go like, I wonder what those names mean, or where does it come from, and how do they all relate to each other, then you'd see a little bit of legend, mythos creation buildings.
Yeah, Justin knows about it too, apparently.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the pronunciation is just like, what? They get the GHs and the
but I will say, I mean, I'm also a Scottish Canadian, and I write a lot of Celtic mythology in my books. But the Irish and Scottish is bad enough, but if you go into the Welsh,
oh yeah. I forget. Well, Dewar, the name Dewar comes from Welsh. And I was like, should I? And I was like, it's DWR. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'm just going for, I'm going for gold, going for ruin, going for gold. I'm doing it. So
the Welsh love their W's.
That's it. So that's where I got the names. And it, like I said, it was important to me, and to create this Canadian mythology that has the roots of, my ancestors. So that's why, if anybody ever does read it and they go, I wonder why she chose those names, that's why.
Okay, so you obviously write fantasy, sci-fi, dystopian, but are there any other genres that you'd like to branch out to in future, or have you branched out?
I have. So for me, dystopia and sci-fi and all that is just like the reverse of history. So whether you're doing history in the future or history, in the past, I mean, it's all the same coin. And if someone could invent a time machine, I'd really appreciate it, because I'd be traveling back and forth anywhere except now, the present. I'd be somewhere, in the future or in the past. So yeah, I'd love to branch out I already have in screenplays, written historical fictions, and I'm actually currently writing a book that will be under a pseudonym. I won't say here, but because I don't want it to mingle with what I'm doing now in dystopia and sci-fi. So, but I do plan on writing more historical fictions, because I just think it's the flip side of the coin, of the sci-fi coin. So those would be. And if I had any kind of real courage, I would probably try my hand at comedy, but that's just so hard that I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, comedy said. Oh, okay. Christy asks the question here. What time period?
Well, currently I'm writing a thing on Irish immigration in Canada in the early 1800s. But I mean, anytime. So I also have a thing for the Regency period, because I love Jane Austen, and I reread her books all the time. So if I had, but like, I'm a slow writer, so I have all these ideas, but I just don't have time to write them all. So I would do something like that. One big inspiration. So for this book, one of the major inspirations that I had was Quest for Fire. And this was my way of writing kind of like this prehistoric story, but set in the future. So it has all the elements of Quest for Fire in the sense that, it's bare, instead of dry, not dry, but wetlands and harsh, prehistoric environment. Well, not prehistoric, but yeah, that time of period. It's kind of set in the future and in the winter, but it's like that desolate, harsh, tough, barren land. Yeah, so any time in history for me is a good time. I mean, I'm constantly, when I was studying in university, there was a part of me that wanted to become an archaeologist, because I was just so, and we're lucky now, because back when I was in university, you would study archaeology, and it was, you had to go, you had to imagine, you'd see the skull and you had to imagine in your head what they looked like, right? And now today with technology on Facebook, you have all these, archaeological sites and these artists that are taking these skulls and making the faces of what they would look like. And that to me is like the epitome of joy, where I'm looking and scrolling. I'm like, oh my God, that's what he looked like, or that's what she looked like, or, ooh. And I start imagining all these stories of how they lived. And if someone does read my book, they'll see that the one thing that I do put a lot of focus and attention on is the world building. And so that all stems from the archaeology that I love to study, on my own free time, where I'm looking at these sites. And I'm just going like, wow, how did they live? Part of the book was inspired by a trip that I made to Scotland, to an old Pict village. I forget the dates, but I mean, they were living like underground, where you just imagine, like, my God, the smoke that must have built in these walls, where they must have been covered in soot all the time, and that to me is just amazing. But I'm rambling now, so I apologize.
Yeah, well, we got one more question here. Justin asked how you would relate to politics in sci-fi, preferably with your own writing as examples.
So that's a really good question, because that's something I strive towards. One of the best political sci-fis that I've read, and the movie's coming out really soon, is Dune, and I can't wait. Oh my God, we've been waiting for it for so long, and now it's finally coming out. And Denis Villeneuve is one of my favorite all-time directors, especially sci-fi. He's so awesome, and the movie looks amazing. But the book by Frank Herbert is just a phenomenal piece of work that this is what I strive for. The politics in those books are just mind-blowing. They're so complex and so realistic to what, was going around in the world at the time he was writing that. And it's just amazing. And so for me, I tried to do that. I think I achieved it to a lesser extent in a simpler, form, because it's just so complex in Frank Herbert's. But he was definitely an inspiration. Dune was definitely an inspiration, where I tried to write. So I don't know, an example from my book. I can't. I'm sorry, I can't give an example, but like I said, it's definitely something that I do strive to achieve in my books. The politics do play an important role, because the king is definitely the major presence, and he's definitely the reigning authority in, it's called Terra, the land that they live in, Terra, and with the underground cult that's trying to revive the ancient religion. Of course, there will be politics, and of course, there will be, playing the Game of Thrones, basically, who's going to be next in line. But yeah, I can't really give an example from my writing. You'll have to read the book. But yeah, to partially answer your question, there was definitely an element that made me aware that, the characters do have to, it's not just all fighting and beating up people. There is some thought behind it. And there's an added element of artificial intelligence and all that. So there was definitely that in play as well. I hope that kind of answered the question. I apologize if it didn't. I'll try and answer it better next time.
Okay, so on that note, I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your book.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for this time. I really, really had a lot of fun. Thank you. Thank you guys for the questions. If you do want to connect with me, I have a newsletter on my website, which is www.kimberlythennessy.com. So it's Lysy, no E's. So KimberlyTHennessy.com, and you can sign up for my newsletter. There's even, because I'm in film, I was able to get my team together and make a small trailer reel. And if you do sign up, you get to see the whole short film based on the book. So a little teaser there. And you can connect with me. Like I usually, post a newsletter once a month, and a lot of my readers, they feel they're free to write to me. They often do, and they try to connect because I talk about movies and books I've read and just whatever is happening in my life at that time. And so if you want to connect, you're free to write to me. And if newsletters aren't your thing, then you can find me on Facebook at Kimberly T. Hennessy author page. And I don't do much Instagram because I'm part of the older generation that finds it very difficult to navigate social media. So I do try and I'll try and get back to Instagram more. But again, it's Kimberly T. Hennessy, my handle. And I do my best, but I'm not super consistent on Instagram. But I am on the other platforms. So that's it. And that's how you can reach me. And the book you can find on Amazon.com. She Runs with Wolves.
Okay. And Justin liked your answer. So.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And and I've linked her book in the description. So if you want to check it out, feel free. And I'd like to thank you for being here. It was a wonderful chat.
It was lovely. I really, really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much.
Okay, and Between the Pages, we'll be back next week with another author, so join us then. And that's all for now. Bye.
Bye.